good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are, also at which point in time you're watching this recording of this webinar. My name is Rasmus Almqvist. I'm the Global Alliance Manager for Salesforce here at F-Secure. The topic for today is how to protect your Salesforce platform from malware. Now, we have a couple of things to be aware of before we start the webinar. Microphones will stay muted throughout the webinar. We are very aware of privacy-related topics. We want to make sure that we don't accidentally even open up your microphones. You can post questions in the question panel, which you have in your menu. But please, if you have any questions that you may feel you don't want to share with the rest of the audience, just mark those ones out, and we will get back to you privately. I may switch off my video when we start. I'm working from home. It's Midsummer Eve, and the whole family is in the house. Just like I think most of you are working from home. If there's any commotion or anything in the background, I don't want that to disturb from the main topic, which is of course around how you go ahead and protect your Salesforce platform from being used for malicious purposes. So if there's anything there, I will of course switch off my video. So before we start, let me start with a massive thank you. As I mentioned, my name is Rasmus Almqvist. I work for F-Secure. We are a leading company in the cybersecurity space. One of our divisions is purely focusing on Salesforce and protecting content residing on Salesforce. Now, we all know you have other priorities going on right now, and we are just extremely grateful to you for allowing us to speak directly to you like this during these trying times. Now, we'd like to think that this whole pandemic situation is over. As we are exiting out of the pandemic, we feel it's also our duty to ensure that we don't jeopardize the good progress that has been made in many countries. So we do want to make this a webinar rather than inviting people into a physical place. So thank you so much again. Depending on where you are, this Friday is a major holiday in the Nordic countries. Not so much, I think, in the DACH region, but we have lots of people who are on vacation. So if you broke your vacation to be part of this webinar, a special thank you to those who did that. The harsh reality of things, though, is that business never rests. Not on Fridays, not on Midsummer Eve, and certainly not during times of pandemics. Business will go on. And the ultimate challenge for any business, including your business or F-Secure's business, is to continue performing while we are going through this pandemic, or as we will be exiting out of this pandemic. Now, I'm pretty convinced that there are people out there like yourselves who have been tasked by your management to look at how to use Salesforce in new and innovative ways. Obviously, with the intention of helping your organization, be more agile and hopefully to come out flying once these extraordinary circumstances like the pandemic that we're going through are but a distant memory. We think that's something that will happen. We think definitely organizations that are agile enough will take advantage of the volatility in the market, but they have to have the platforms there. So what's our objective today? Why are we here? Well, the aim of this webinar is to give you some insights, many or few, but some insights into the risks associated with moving more collaboration-heavy workloads to the cloud, and in particular, of course, Salesforce clouds. And of course, what to do and what measures to take to mitigate these risks. Now, I have personally been involved in helping organizations move their business to the cloud for a long time now, and I want to share just my very personal thoughts on organizations and their journey to the cloud, and in particular around collaboration with workloads, and talk about the risks that I see. Now, the reason why this is important is because no organization, really independent on what business you're in, no one operates in complete isolation. We are all highly dependent on things like our external partners, our suppliers, depending on what business you're in, distributors, and of course customers, not to forget about those, because without these externals, we call them, without this ecosystem, your organization would simply cease to exist. And just because we have been in a state of lockdown for a long time now, and it's, I know it's been only a few months, but it feels like years, to be honest, it doesn't mean that we're collaborating any less within our partners, suppliers, and customers within the ecosystem. I think it's even fair to say, in many cases, because of this lockdown, we might even be collaborating more with folks in our ecosystem. Now, this is, of course, highly dependent on what business you're in and how you specifically operate. And I'm completely aware that there will be huge differences between how content-heavy that collaboration is. Some organizations operate more on a sort of light communications. They share perhaps emails or they call each other. But there are organizations in certain businesses where the collaboration is mostly content-driven, files-driven. And that is one area that we are going to be looking in particular. So let's just take a few steps back and examine what I mean when I use the word content-heavy collaboration or content collaboration. And here's just one way of looking at this. And I want to sort of dissect this because it will have an impact on how we assess risks and what the use cases are that may be associated with higher risk behavior or higher risks and potentially even leading into threats. So content collaboration in my mind can be examined by looking at the four following elements. The first one is a no-brainer. It's of course the amount of content that is shared on a Salesforce platform. I don't think we need to dive any deeper into that one. But the second one is the frequency within which this content is being shared. So for example, if there are certain workloads that you normally would have done in a non-cloud environment, an on-prem environment, and you're now moving these workloads onto the cloud, and for example, just a good example could be email to case or support functions that you're moving onto the cloud to save cost and to be more efficient, the frequency is going to be quite high. The third one is the number of organizations within that ecosystem that needs to have access to those documents. In other words, are you allowing organizations in your ecosystem access to content on a platform that you manage? Now, for many traditional organizations, that is a big no-no. You should not share content externally that is on a platform that you own because of the risk associated. But there are highly specialized organizations that are dependent on sharing content with externals. And obviously, they want to move on to more agile and more efficient platforms, Salesforce being one of them. So they have to, in many cases, share content with externals. Think of use cases where inspection protocols, certifications, audit reports, and these kind of things are being shared within the ecosystem. The fourth one, a fourth way of slicing and dicing, what I mean when I talk about content collaboration, is the direction of the flow of the content that is shared and created on the platform. So let me just give you a couple of examples. For example, allowing externals, people within that ecosystem, not just access to content, but also the ability to upload, author, and most importantly, share content with other organizations on that platform. So you see this sort of horizontal exchange of documents happening on your platform. Now, that is a platform that you, as a Salesforce customer, may be managing, and it is in your interest, and there may be perfectly good business reasons for allowing externals to do that. But we have to talk about what the risks are that are associated with these use cases. I've seen a lot of requirements like this coming in, and I just want to summarize these requirements really quickly and see if you recognize some of those coming up from your own organization. So the question is, like, what are the things that business owners within your organization require? And these, I'm aware of the fact that these are blunt. These may be highly simplified, but they kind of summarize in some way, the slicing and dicing of the different ways that you can collaborate. So the first one is a no-brainer. We need to share more content on the platform with customers and partners. Yes, a fairly straightforward business requirement, and the platforms you would use for this in most cases would be something like a community platform of some sort, using Salesforce Community Cloud to do that. The second one, which we see quite often, is yes, we want to do this. We want to keep pushing the envelope what it's possible, but we also want to do it more often. So we're adding to the frequency of content that is being shared with externals. And finally, going back to the horizontal movements, we also, business leaders require, we want customers and partners to be able to upload and share content within the ecosystem, all in an effort to be more agile, to be more productive on the platform. Absolutely, there is nothing wrong with this. It's the natural progression of trying to outcompete your peers in the market. Now, I've been using the word risk now quite a few times, and I just want to straighten out a couple of things with this word, and in particular in relation to the word threat. Now, you would quite often, you're all professionals, and I assume that you know quite well the difference between the two. But when talking to our customers, and especially when you have both business leaders and technical leaders, or especially in specific security folks in this conversation, and they are debating the pros and cons of moving to a cloud platform, they use words like risk and threat. And sometimes we forget that these two words need to be sorted out. There needs to be a common understanding what we need. So the first thing is, when we talk at F-Secure, talk about risk, it does not mean that there's a threat that we can identify. It's just a risk, and that risk can be evaluated specific to a use case, but it doesn't mean that there's a threat. But it doesn't mean you shouldn't do anything either. It's just you need to be aware of what the landscape looks like. What risk means is simply put, it just means that you are exposing your organization to potential harm. For example, and we spoke about it, by allowing external organizations access to documents that reside on your platform. So, it's worth reminding ourselves, I think, that there may be perfectly good business reasons why you need to do that, and it's perfectly acceptable to assume that there's no immediate direct threat to the business. But I just wanted to make sure that when we go forward in this presentation, and when we do speak with different stakeholders within the organization, that we are clear on what we mean with the words risk and threat. The good news is, if it's risk means that it's something you can manage. Now, we've been speaking about risk, and we've been speaking about the cloud, but where is the connection to Salesforce? Well, there is a connection, and it's a fairly obvious connection. Just like every single other credible cloud service provider out there, Salesforce offers its customers a superbly safe platform. Now, you would probably think, well, why are we saying this? No. Salesforce is a safe platform. They do everything from auditing their data center providers. They monitor the LAN network just to see what traffic traverses the network. They manage access control. They have a bunch of security levers in place to make sure that the platform is safe for you to use. However, just like the others out there, Salesforce operates within this security paradigm, which is called shared responsibility. Shared responsibility means that Salesforce is responsible for the platform, but the customers are responsible for any kind of content that resides on the platform. Sometimes customers are finding it hard to understand the differences or should I say, where the demarcation line is. But if we say content on the platform, that is 100% the responsibility of the customer of Salesforce to ensure that it's perfectly safe to be used. So it is important for many, many reasons, and not at least because the customers who are exploring new ways of collaborating with externals need to know what their part of the deal is. So, and it's something we spend a lot of time educating and informing customers, most of the time non-technical customer representatives, about where to draw the line between Salesforce's responsibility and the customer's responsibility. Our job, of course, as F-Secure, is to provide the tools you need to be safe on the platform. So the reason being, really, and this is kind of the big background here, and we spoke about it earlier on, no business operates in isolation. They're all operating within a wide interconnected web of suppliers, vendors, partners, and we spoke about it, customers. And those supply chains, and you know, you can be in manufacturing or you can be in pharmaceuticals, but those supply chains leading up to that final ready product can be really long. And there's a high degree of interdependency between the organizations that make up this supply chain. And you can take, I believe, any manufacturer, and they will probably tell you that the number of organizations they work with in their ecosystem to get a product out the door is really vast, complex, and they probably will testify to the fact that any delay in that process can be devastating, not just to their business, but to other businesses within that ecosystem. Of course, this is where Salesforce plays a pivotal, and I would even argue crucial role in enabling these organizations to operate in the most efficient way. That's where you share not just the orders, but any additional documentation surrounding the order, just to make sure everything works as planned. So you have this ecosystem which is built around Salesforce, and it is a clear business tool. The problem here is, or I almost said challenge, but I actually think that there's a problem. If any link in this whole chain of events breaks, all organizations in that ecosystem will in fact suffer. Now, if you are running a Salesforce instance and you're sharing content that is either uploaded by your partners, your customers, your ecosystem folks on your platform, or they download content from your platform, it is your responsibility to make sure that the content on that platform is safe from any kind of malicious code, be it computer viruses, malware, ransomware, or even links that may be causing a disruption to the whole value chain. Now, there are lots of challenges around this. First of all, there are many IT organizations who think they have the capability of securing a cloud platform, and that normally stems from perhaps a lack of understanding of the shared responsibility model. There are IT departments who have just kind of shifted or lifted and shifted their the way they protected their on-prem servers and the systems running on their own on-prem environment, and just shifting it logically to the cloud and assuming that these cloud providers are providing similar sets of capability. That is not true. Sometimes I would argue, in many ways, a cloud service is more safe than your on-prem environment. But there are elements where you have a responsibility, and if you don't know what those responsibilities are pertaining to content security, just to give one example, you may be in serious trouble. So we as I mentioned, we spend a lot of time educating customers around their responsibilities. And there's one thing in particular which is kind of troublesome, and that is a lack of understanding of how your existing antivirus or anti-malware solutions work, because they are originally designed to be used for licensed users on a domain, which may be your corporate domain. They may be endpoint protection solutions that are doing a superbly job in protecting your endpoint, or at least protecting licensed users and their endpoints, but they may not be able to extend similar capability to cloud services. Now, there are ways in which you can mitigate this, and there are things like Cloud Application Security Broker, CASB solutions that will extend those capabilities to the cloud, but then it may not cover all use cases. It's only covering, of course, licensed users, and it's not certainly real time. What we argue is that should you want to have a good security posture on the cloud, you need to assess what your risks are. You need to assess them in relation to the use cases you want to run, and then really score what those risks are and how it may impact access to the platform, access to the files, and of course what the impact on the business may be. And you can actually get a pretty good score on how secure you are on the platform. Now, we're not saying, and I also want to be absolutely clear about this, we're not saying that your current antivirus, your current solutions are doing a bad job. That's not what we're saying. The paradigm is different. They were never designed to do third-party cloud service protection. But more about this and how we have designed our solution from the ground up and how you can protect yourself. But before we go into the specifics on how we actually do that, let me just pause and talk about something which is scary. I mean, the topic for today was how do you go about protecting your Salesforce platform from ransomware? Now, I'm aware there are lots of different types of malware out there, but ransomware is just one kind, but it's a particularly vicious one. And before I go any deeper, I just sort of want to level the field here and just to make sure we all have the same sort of level of understanding of what ransomware is as a phenomenon and sort of what the weird, perhaps sometimes scary business logic of ransomware is. So first of all, ransomware is a piece of software that a hacker is trying to get into some kind of computer system or of sorts into an unsuspecting customer. Their ultimate aim is to gain access to these systems, and there are different ways of getting there, and to then encrypt or prevent access to these files or systems by encrypting that environment. Now, depending on what business you're in, these systems that they want to render access to impossible can be things like order management solutions, which of course, if you're a manufacturer, is going to be devastating. Patient files, big issue, or anything else, in fact, your organization's business is highly dependent on. And the only way for these organizations to regain access to the files and systems is to pay a sum of money to get access to the encryption key that will hopefully give you access to these files again. Now, obviously, this is done in exchange for just a little bit of money, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And that's where this the name ransomware comes from. It's a way of extorting money out of organizations for them to get access to their old files. It's a really vicious way of attacking organizations. So I'm going to take you through a scenario. This is a scenario of a ransomware solution called Dridex, or a family of ransomware. So let me just sort of walk you through how to interpret this slide, because it's pretty busy. And this is, of course, a made-up scenario. This is not a use case as such, but this is a depiction of how a targeted attack could unfold. So on the left there, you'll see user 1, 2, 4, and 3, and all representing different companies. And in this, the conversation that we had so far, we talked about content-heavy collaboration on Salesforce Community Cloud services. And of course, Salesforce Community Cloud representing that blue cloud there. And there are different ways in which you can use this platform as a vehicle for delivering ransomware. This is what I'm going to be sort of talking to in this scenario. The most common way is very unsophisticated, in fact, but the most common way of delivering malicious code is by embedding this code into documents. So look at user 1, company X, uploading, for example, a community project file into the community. So by embedding it into the document, or can be done in a different way by including a web link in that document that points a user, that would be user 3, representing company B here in this slide down to the left, pointing this user to a website which then delivers malware to that person's computer. So different ways of doing it. And we want to make sure that a community cloud service cannot be used or misused or abused, I should say, to deliver malware. And we want to make sure that we cover all these scenarios. Now, attackers can be clever. So if you're just having a link in a document and it says like, oh, go to www.randomwebsite.something.com, a user might get just a little bit suspicious and say, well, hold on, I may not want to click on that link. However, hackers are smart and they're targeting multiple organizations. So it may be that they are setting up websites that may look very genuine, very real, or maybe just depicting or mimicking, for example, a workday site, which may be part of a workflow that somebody needs to complete on a Salesforce Community Cloud. HR organizations, for example, need to report, and they need to go to another cloud service. They need to put in information, and so to avoid people mistakenly clicking on links or opening documents that may be malicious, we are scanning these for malicious intent. So not just the actual code, but also links that may be embedded into a document. We will open them up, we will look at them, and we will deem whether that is safe or not. So that is a scenario that hackers are using, luring people in to doing something that they absolutely were not intending to do in the first place. But anyway, when successful, and when we're looking at stats later on, you will see a surprisingly high degree of these attacks actually being successful. When successful in getting code into the PC or a computer system, that's when the real work starts. And so let me just walk you through bear with me 1 second. I'm just going to make my clicker work here. 1 second. Apologies for that. There we go. So what happens when you get access to a system? So you remember user 3, company B, they have been infected. So it normally starts by the hacker trying to discover as much as possible about this particular user, who he or she is, and to try to get access to computer systems that he or she may have access to. Now, it makes absolutely no commercial sense to target user 3 specifically and start extorting money out of user 3, because a normal person within an organization, yes, you would freak out, it would be uncomfortable, it would be scary, but that person doesn't necessarily have the funds to just cough up and provide money to the hacker. So what they're doing is they're listening, they're scanning the systems and waiting for someone with admin privileges so that you can go after. So there's and they have time, they have all the time in the world. They are there in what we call discovery mode, and they're just looking for people and access, scanning the system until they get, in fact, access to a system. So when they do get access to the system, and this can take, by the way, months, and in some cases, they can even be there for years, but months is more likely the scenario. So once they have access to this computer system, they will move slowly. And this, of course, is there to avoid setting up tripwires that may be built into the system. Now, the tripwires are normally set off by suspicious, unusual behavior. And these can be, for example, accessing specific files in the system from an unusual location, or accessing systems from unmanaged devices, like the hacker itself, he or she is using a device, but it's not necessarily a managed device. That can be suspicious. Or they're trying to access files that are privileged, i.e. only intended for viewing of specific users. Now, really clever systems, they will look at a scoring of these different odd behaviors. And all these odd behaviors could be completely fine if you're looking at them from a systems perspective. They could be perfectly fine if you look at these in isolation. And they could be interpreted, as I mentioned, as being, it's just someone trying to access, let's not worry too much about it, kind of thing. But when you look at these in combination and you layer the information, you start adding intelligence to it, it will, if the system is clever enough, it will set off an alarm. The problem here, though, is that time is on the side of the hacker, and hackers can spend, as I mentioned, lots of time just slowly, gradually, systematically working their way through the organization. There's no rush. We have to remind ourselves that this is just software sitting on a computer. This is not someone, actively monitoring a system. So spotting changes in behavioral patterns is really something we recommend that you do on your systems. It's difficult to spot them, but it is indeed possible, and something we highly recommend. So just moving forward then, in this scenario, once they've been monitoring and they've been getting access to the systems, they will move in to start exploiting this organization. And that will happen through a quick encryption of that specific system, and basically blocking access to these for users. Now, those systems, if they're internal, you may argue that it's the extent of that damage is only extended to your organizations. But if it is a system which shares information with external people within your ecosystem, the whole ecosystem is in trouble. And that's why this whole idea of shared responsibility is so important. So normally, after an attack, what a hacker would do, or an attacker would do, is to leave details with very clear instructions to the targeted organization on how to get access back to these systems. And normally, it means they have to pay a ransom of some sort. So normally, we're talking about bitcoins, just because the way Bitcoin is designed, it's a really convenient way for hackers to earn their money. But bitcoins can be super expensive, and obviously it depends on where they are in the market. But right now, one bitcoin is about 8,000 plus euros, which we're talking about quite a bit of money. If, as in many cases, the ransom in bitcoins can vary somewhere between 2 and 100 bitcoins just to get access to the system. Now, let's dive just a little bit deeper into this. But there's one thing I do want to say. I've been working with organizations who have suffered ransomware attacks, and the state of confusion and paralysis these organizations are going into is just incredible. And it's if you haven't gone through that, or if you haven't worked with organizations who have been the victims of a ransomware attack, I can tell you it's absolutely devastating, not just to the business, but also to morale, because it deteriorates everything in that organization. Not something we recommend you want to go through. Well, thankfully though, there is a solution for Salesforce at least, and that solution is called Cloud Protection for Salesforce. So let me walk you through how the system works and how it's different perhaps to some of the existing traditional antivirus solutions out there. So the first one, of course, is content that is either uploaded or downloaded onto Salesforce will automatically, provided that you have your user is licensed, will trigger a request from F-Secure Security Cloud. F-Secure Security Cloud will do a scan of this content. It will check for, we have something like just over 8 billion different things we're looking at. So it will do a threat intelligence check. It will run a antivirus scan. And of course, if there's something that needs to be opened up and checked, we have a smart cloud sandbox for that as well. The key here is content and the actual scanning of the content happens within the Salesforce instance, within the customer's own instance. And should something be detected, it will be picked up, and the administrator will have access to a rich set of reporting analytics capabilities to understand what went on, what was the threat landscape, who handled the document, all the things you need to be able to revise your security posture in the cloud. And also, of course, if something happens, to be able to report back. It's a superb, unique solution for Salesforce that was developed 100% cloud-based. It was developed with Salesforce, and it was a solution that that doesn't require any kind of, or is a solution that doesn't require any kind of middleware, doesn't affect the end user experience, because everything happens in the cloud, not on your PC as such. So I just wanted to take one step further and give you a couple of examples where ransomwares have been successful. Now, you can all pick your own little example here, but those that are hitting the news, of course, in many cases are the scariest ones. So British Airways, you don't want a data breach, for example, to happen at your airliner, but it happened. There are banks that have been targeted. There are lots of different organizations, and quite often these organizations will have to shut down their business for a significant period of time, which is not just bad for business, but also, of course, bad for reputation. Hackers know this. So one example is the example that I personally experienced, an example with TravelX, where TravelX, as you may know if you've traveled, and I appreciate you may not have used TravelX for a while due to this pandemic, but TravelX is a foreign exchange provider. So in airports, in train stations, they have these booths, and you can exchange money. Now, what happened here is they were down for a number of days. I think it was just over a week, and was down. And what they had to do with these poor agents, they had to revert back to using pen and paper to complete foreign exchange transactions. Now, if you picture where these organizations, you know that there's a competing company just sitting next to them. So that was a real big blow for these folks. Business went elsewhere. So, and I want to point out, there's the organization has not commented publicly on the attack from earlier this year, and it's alleged to be a ransomware attack. We don't have the exact details, but the word on the street is that this organization ended up paying a pretty significant six-number sum to a group of hackers just to gain access to their systems. So it's understandable with the threat of losing the business altogether. It's easy just to pay up. So just a little bit about the numbers. So in a recent survey done by a company called Infrascale, and they surveyed more than 500 C-level executives within the SME space, 73% of these 500 C-level executives, 73%, that's a huge number, they said they had been the target of ransomware attacks. And 46% of these, I mean the ones that had been targeted, said they actually ended up being victims of a ransomware attack. So almost half of organizations in this space who were targeted actually became victims. That is a huge number, in my opinion. It's enormous. And when just sort of dissecting and looking at what kind of companies were targeted, it was more likely, it's not a massive difference, but it's more likely that the B2B organizations actually ended up paying some sort of ransom to this organization than a B2C. I haven't dug any deeper into why that is the case, but I have my own suspicions around the how critical B2B and the smaller number of customers they may have just makes them more vulnerable to these kind of attacks. So it's more likely that they may be actually paying ransoms. So of those who had been targets or had been victims, 26% of those who decided not to pay would in fact say, well, do you know what, we would consider paying, provided that 60% said if they would they would pay to restore files of their systems, and 53% of those 26 said yes, we would consider paying if that meant that we could protect our public image. So the thing I spoke about earlier on is not just the damage it will do to your immediate business, but also to your reputation as a business, because trust is one of the most important things. And some of the things that these attacks do is they will tarnish your image as a trusted company. Not because you fell victim to a crime, but there's always this suspicion: is there something else going on? Are there backdoors? So on and so on. And we just want to prevent that from day one. So how much are these organizations paying out then? Well, again, according to the same survey, 43% said they paid somewhere between $10,000 and $50,000, which is kind of in line with the global average, which the FBI estimates to be about $47,000. And a small minority paid more than $100,000. Now, if you are a person whose glass is half full and you look at the world in a positive way, you may say, well, do you know what? That's not a whole lot of money to pay to restore business. And it's right. Like you may be, your business may be at stake here. So it's quite likely that you feel very, very tempted to pay a ransom. In particular, if we're talking about sums that are large, if we're talking about an individual, but for a large organization, fairly small when looking at the numbers. And this is the viciousness of ransomware. This is why I think it's such a despicable crime/business model for these criminals, because it makes complying with the criminal's demands easier, but I have to pay out. So I do understand, by the way, why many organizations would say, well, okay, let's just pay. I mean, it's going to cost us more probably to try to figure out and restore files and install new systems and whatnot, and paying a small ransom. So I do understand why they would want to pay, but there's absolutely no guarantees that even if you pay the ransom and you get the encryption key, that those files will be restored. And there's no guarantees, of course, that those files are safe to use now. You have to scan those for malicious content as well. So with that, I appreciate I'm just over time here. So thank you so much to everyone who joined this webinar. I hope you found this to be of interest and gave you a little bit of food of thought and some ideas on how to have conversations within your organization when talking about cloud services as of course being a fantastic driver for agility and productivity, but also to have a more detailed and nuanced conversation of the risk associated. But most importantly, what to do about those risks, because those risks can be managed. So before I end, I think we have the opportunity to take questions. I'm for one extremely excited about questions. There's a questions little panel in your user interface. Feel free to post questions there. I will be answering those, and as I mentioned, if you have any questions that you do not want us to read out loud, more than happy to not do that, and we'll get back to you privately and independently. So with that, let's open up for questions if there are any. I can tell though that one of the more common questions we often get is, how do you go about assessing the risk? Well, one of the ways in which organizations can assess risk and see how much investment needs to go in is really to start looking at individual use cases. This is not a binary thing where you say, are there risk or is there not risk? There's always risk in the cloud. The question is that risk high or low, and everything in between? And how manageable is that risk? And we definitely work with organizations in assessing that risk, and it is a use case business workflow type conversation where we are, and our experts are picking that process apart and trying to understand where a potential threat may occur, where potential hackers could get access to your system, and of course making recommendations on how to mitigate those risks. That should give your organization peace of mind that the tools that, and of course, I forgot to mention one thing, then looking, of course, at what tools are required to mitigate those risks. But that really should give your organization peace of mind in terms of having a clear understanding of, if you do go down the route of allowing externals access to your cloud services, what those risks are. I think with that, as I see no questions have been coming in, I'm going to go ahead and end this webinar. Final words from me. Thank you so much. We understand you have other priorities. We understand that it's also Friday today. So thank you so much. Should you want to connect with me directly, you can do so over email. You see my email address there. You can also connect with me over LinkedIn. And if you have any questions, any thoughts, or you just want to have a more deeper conversation around how we can protect your Salesforce environment, do contact me. Thank you so much. Have a fantastic day and a fantastic summer. And guys, stay safe out there.